I'll be calling on our next speaker, who is Professor Alina Rettová from the University of Beirut, Germany. She'll be speaking to us today on experiencing a better life, implementing development, on the intersection of phenomenology and development. Prof, we are happy to have you here. Please speak to us. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I hope
we can.
everything is okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm really excited to be in this very important workshop. And as the previous speaker mentioned, I also think that philosophy needs to engage with real life. It needs to engage with lived experience. And it also needs to think of its implications in the real world. For that reason, I would like to give this talk. This is my outline. I was first phenomenology, and this is already, as you can see, I will connect it to pedagogy and then to development in a kind of three-step process that should take us from phenomenology to development. I will have a case study. I wanted first to speak about a film, but in the end, because actually myself and Albert Cassanda are going to also talk about this film in another workshop in South Africa in September, I decided to take a simpler case study because actually the momentum of this talk is not in the case study, but rather the framework. My case study will deal with the concept of time and development. And I will give a case study or an example of what I mean by looking into futuristic imagination in literature. And I will suggest that phenomenology is in fact that kind of futuristic imagination, or can be. First of all, sorry, I cannot seem to move the PowerPoint. Okay, now it's moving. So first of all, I got too far. Okay, phenomenology. Let me just adjust visual. Okay. So, sorry. What is phenomenology? Phenomenology is a method of scrutiny of lived experience. It enables formulations and analyses of various experiences, including the painful ones, which is a very frequent topic of phenomenology, because, of course, suffering is something that concerns us as humans most of all. But it also opens experiences of joy, fulfillment, and of harmony with oneself. So in a way, I would like to suggest that phenomenology should not forget about the joyful experiences, because they are also something that defines us as humans. I would like to suggest that phenomenology can integrate a pedagogy towards instituting a better life. And through this, it can become a tool for development. Now, to do this, I would suggest there are three steps that we need to look at as philosophers, as phenomenologists. The first step is the question of experience. Phenomenology makes it possible to understand what it means to experience life, and we can also imagine experiencing a better life, or we can even experience a better life. You know, I have just come from Martinique, actually. I experienced a really better life there. If you like, a holiday. It was not a holiday, it was a conference, but you know, you can experience a better life through being in a better place, through doing better practices than your everyday work, for instance. So you can experience a better life, you remember it. Now, the question is, of course, how to deal with that experience of better life. I would like to suggest here that we need to consider the question of vicarious experience, experience through proxy, so to speak. You can experience something personally, as when you travel, for instance, but also when you play. It's the behavioral component of experience. But you can also experience it vicariously if you read a novel, for instance, if you watch a film, or if someone tells you about something. Right. So I would like to point to this cognitive component of experience, which can be also mediated through not direct personal bodily experience, but through art, for instance. And it's usually considered under the notion of mimesis or imitation. So I would like to point to fictional literature and film, to imagination, imaginary writing and filming and other media as something that plays a key role in our experience of this better life, of our option and possibility to experience something better than what we are actually stuck in, for instance. And now the critical question, of course, is how to connect this vicarious experience of a better life and the behavioral. So if I experience something better through media like film or literature, how can I actually implement it or institute it in my own life, in my behavior, in my practices? How do we induce this kind of integration of practice and insight, vicarious and personal experience? In other words, how to make the vicarious an experience. Here I would like to point to three notions: language, genre, and medium. And I would like to suggest it's really important to mediate experience in a way that is accessible to the experiencing subject. So, of course, language, if I take just one of the three, language, and let me quote here, is a pillar supporting all the elements of an African phenomenological description, and hermeneutics as methods of scrutiny and interpretation, semiotics as the activity of signification and analysis of the meanings issued from embodied meaning-making, and text analysis and interpretation as ways towards an understanding of the expressions of the experience of Africans. So language, genre, you need to experience something in a genre that is accessible to you, that you understand. And medium, yeah, we can then talk about medium, film, literature, and so on. The second step, I would call it phenomenological pedagogy. So this is the question of how to teach yourself to live better, how to reproduce that experience of a better life that you have access through vicarious experience, how to appropriate it through repetition, right? How do you actually repeat that experience? Do you read the book again, or do you do something else with it? So it's a kind of cognitive behavioral process, self-imposed or imposed by others. And it is the key in pedagogy. And you connect really the personal and the vicarious elements of experience. Now, I have a little souvenir for you from Prague. This is it. Once it appears. Oh God, I think that there is a kind of delay in the response of my PowerPoint. So it will probably pop up when I'm already. Okay, that's what happened. I don't know if you see the same for me. It came with a substantial delay. So this is my little souvenir. A man from what was called Bohemia then, in the 17th century, basically, Johannes Amos Comenius, who was a key figure in modern pedagogy. Actually, he influenced modern pedagogy because he spoke of education through play. Yeah, so what is play? Play is actually putting yourself in that experience to learn the experience. He also insisted on experiential learning, so engaging multisensory experiences, actually, in all the senses. And then, of course, connecting what you have learned with your real world practices and experiences. What he also insisted on was pictures. So he actually made textbooks with pictures and native languages instead of Latin. Yeah, so there was this kind of revolution in pedagogy that actually only came to fruition several centuries later. So in a way, I'm speaking of very similar things in my talk. Now, the third step is politics, and I will not speak about this one because that really infringes on and it's the praxis directed towards actually imposing or implementing ways to make people experience better life, but this is really beyond phenomenology. Now, my case study, I'm saying because, of course, I don't think any of us actually believes that there is one African concept of time. But what Vitti was talking about is actually really important beyond this idea of conceptualizing African concepts of time. So Mbiti said, he was a Kenyan philosopher and a religious scholar, as you know, a priest. He said, there is an African concept of time which has two dimensions, the past and the present. And the past is a kind of source of events that spill over to the present. They are rehearsed, lived again in the sasa, in the present dimension of time. And he opposed this to what he perceived as a linear concept of time or linear understanding of time in Western thought, where he said there was an indefinite past and indefinite or infinite future, if you like. So the present was actually not this kind of time when you experience things, it's just a punctual, it's just a point through which the past spills into the future. Now, the implications for Mbiti were very important and very grave, very significant. He said because of this understanding of time, there was no concept of distant future in African thought. And for him, this meant problems in Africa's development. Because if you cannot imagine the future, obviously, you cannot imagine that the future will be better than the present. You cannot imagine development. Now, I have a cluster of quotations from Vitti, but I think I will skip them for reasons of time. You can read them on the screen briefly, maybe you are familiar with them. Now, of course, there is a kind of summary of Mbiti's understanding in Offer, who wrote very much the same thing. So again, I will skip this. Now, of course, the question is, can we simply dismiss Mbiti? Of course, he had a very essentialist understanding of Africa, which was based on a very limited empirical evidence from studying only two languages and two ethnic communities, so to speak. He had very wrong arguments. He did not understand a lot of things. For example, his linguistic arguments are completely flawed. So can we simply dismiss him? I think we would be spilling the baby with the bathwater, throwing the baby with the bathwater if we do that. Because in fact, what Mbiti is saying is this kind of lack of a phenomenology of the future, of futuristic imagination that he observes in African cultures. And in a way, this is something that we can easily imagine happening, right? Beyond Africa, we can imagine it everywhere. In fact, all communities work, I think most people actually work on multiple concepts of time. So he's describing one type of experience where your present is in fact something that your ancestors have lived through and you reproduce it. And then your future consequently is a reproduction of that past, yeah? So a lacking of a phenomenology of the future. Now, is this really a problem? It is a problem, as Kojo Eshun says in his article about Afrofuturism, because imaginations of the future are relevant. He says the powerful employ futurists and draw power from the futures they endorse, thereby condemning the disempowered to live in the past. Future exists, and he gives us these lists in mathematical formalizations such as computer simulations, in economic projections, in weather reports, in futures trading, in think tank reports, in consultancy papers. But it also exists through informal descriptions such as science fiction cinema, science fiction novels, sonic fictions, religious prophecy, and venture capital. Now, Eshun goes as far as speaking about futures industry. So futuristic imagination is, in fact, immensely important. Because if you don't do it, if you don't engage in these futures, in this future industry, you are reduced to being made for. Your future is being made for you if you are passive, if you remain passive in futuristic imagination. Now, Eshun says this concerns Africa because Africa increasingly exists, I quote, as the object of futurist projection. Now, this futurist projection, which is made for Africa, is actually not a good one. He says further, I quote, African social reality is overdetermined by intimidating global scenarios, doomsday economic projections, weather predictions, medical reports on AIDS, and life expectancy forecasts, all of which predict decades of immiserization. Africa is always the zone of the absolute dystopia. So he's saying, look, this is really dangerous if you ignore the way your future is imagined for you. It is necessary to take agency and engage in futuristic imagination. Now, in fact, this is already happening. Right? It's not something that does not exist, but theorists like Mbiti, but we have to be a bit tolerant with him because of the he wrote in the 1970s, 1960s. Anyway, but people like Mbiti, who are, however, still very influential in today's African philosophy, for instance, if you read about African concepts of time, everyone always refers to Mbiti. So people like Mbiti actually tend to play down the futuristic imagination going on in the continent. Now, Africa needs a phenomenology of the future, and this is done in what can be called Afrofuturism. Ashun says, Afrofuturism tries to intervene in the dystopian projections regarding Africa and regain control over views of Africa's future through a study of, I quote, extraterrestriality, futurology, and techno-science fictions. Now, what is Afrofuturism? Now, Afrofuturism, there are many other names that are used for this. African futurism, for instance, and there are other options as well. Speculative fiction is a kind of broad concept. It is, I quote, Yashek, speculative fiction or science fiction written by both Afro-diasporic and African.
Here, Prof.
I have to conclude. Sorry?
Have 5 minutes more, please.
5 minutes. Okay, perfect. I'm actually approaching the conclusion. Thank you. Okay, so Afrofuturism, speculative fiction, yeah, it's the speculation about the future. Yashek says further, it puts a black face on the future, so it kind of inserts Africa and the African diaspora into the futures industries, if you like. I would call it a phenomenology of the future because it projects and imagines the future. It analyzes present problems, and in order to project a betterment of human life and a better human life in the future. Now, I will give you one example, which is, again, I mostly work on text in African languages, but I have taken one in English now for the sake of simplicity. Nnedi Okorafor's Binti series is or tends to be called an Afrofuturist or African futurist, if you like, text or series of texts. And if you read the novel with respect to how it projects the future, it's about a young girl mathematician who travels to another planet and who uses technologies derived from African knowledge systems, such as using special kinds of soil to create ointments and so on. So if you look at this text, you see that it projects development on a number of levels, right? It challenges gender stereotypes. You have a girl mathematician. You have a female protagonist who is the carrier of agency. She is the one who decides about what will happen with her life. So there is a kind of social development aspect to it. There is a very important epistemological aspect to it in that advanced technology is derived from African knowledge systems and African epistemologies, if we understand that as the manner of gaining knowledge. So this series of novels actually projects a future that is based on a developed culture, which is derived from African cultures, right? So there is and societies, of course. So there is a number of aspects how the novel series addresses development. I'm concluding now. I'm in a way pushing for literature, film, and other texts to become the texts of African phenomenology, especially speculative literature, but also film, obviously, as projective and creative imagination. I call this literature ayeristic, meaning it is something ailleurs, elsewhere. Yeah. But elsewhere, not basically, it is futuristic literature and literature of elsewhere, if you like, utopia. Yeah, utopia meaning another place that does not exist in this real world. Is a tool of development. It can critique the present and imagine a better future. It makes it possible for us as humans to experience it through literary texts, in that it teaches us something. And then, of course, we need to look at the question of language, genre, and medium. And I would really like to plead here for and the use of, if possible, African languages and also African genres. And then we need to maybe consider the question of medium. Thank you so much. This is where I stop. And I can
Thank you very much, Prof, for this
sharing.
wonderful lecture. Before we take Q&A for this lecture, we'll take the third lecture for this section, then we'll open the floor for Q&A. Please kindly jot down your questions, your comments, or contributions for this lecture and the previous one. So